The rain that fell on Creston Avenue that night did not fall gently. It came in sheets, cold and indifferent, the kind of rain that soaked through wool coats in seconds and turned the gutters into small rivers rushing toward nowhere. The streetlights along the road flickered with the lazy inconsistency of things that had been neglected too long, casting orange pools of light on the wet pavement before blinking out again, leaving stretches of pure darkness between them. Amara Osai stood at the edge of the sidewalk, with a single duffel bag at her feet and nowhere to go. She was 9 months pregnant. Her yellow dress, the one she had worn to her mother's birthday dinner just 3 hours ago, the one with the small white flowers along the hem that her Aunt Dora had sewn on by hand as a gift, was soaked through and clinging to the enormous swell of her belly. Her sandals were already ruined. The cold had moved past her skin and settled somewhere deeper, in the place where fear lives when it becomes too large for the chest to contain. Behind her, the iron gate of the Osai family compound was shut, bolted. The intercom light that usually glowed green was dark. Her father had turned it off himself. She had watched him do it through the window of the front parlor, his face arranged in the particular blankness he wore whenever he had made a decision he considered final. Her mother had stood behind him, not watching, her hands pressed flat against her thighs the way she did when she was trying not to cry, and had decided not to anyway. Her brother Kofi had been the one to carry the duffel bag down the steps. He had placed it on the ground with a gentleness that was somehow worse than if he had thrown it. He had not looked at her face. He had gone back inside and the door had closed with a soft, definitive click. That click was still echoing in Amara's ears. She pressed one hand to the side of her belly, where the baby had been pushing against her ribs with increasing urgency for the past hour. She breathed slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The midwife's instructions came back to her in fragments: steady breathing, don't panic, your body knows what to do. But the midwife had meant those words for a hospital room or a prepared bedroom, not for a midnight sidewalk in the rain with a locked gate at your back and a city that didn't know your name spread out before you. She had $43 in her purse, a phone with 11% battery, a duffel bag containing 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a small photo of her grandmother, and the baby's hospital documents her doctor had told her to keep with her always. She had nothing else. The thing about being cast out is that the world doesn't pause to acknowledge it. Cars still moved along the far end of Creston Avenue. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The rain kept coming. The city breathed its enormous, indifferent breath, and Amara stood in the middle of it, 23 years old, 9 months pregnant, and utterly alone. She picked up the duffel bag. She started walking. She didn't know where she was going. She walked because standing still felt like surrender, and she was not ready to surrender yet. She walked because the baby was still moving inside her, still pushing and turning, still insisting on being alive and present and demanding, and something about that insistence made her feel that she owed it to both of them to keep moving. If you've ever felt completely alone at the moment you needed the world most, you know exactly what Amara felt on that sidewalk. What do you think you would have done in her place? Tell us in the comments. Your answer might surprise you. She had walked perhaps 4 blocks when the first contraction hit. It was not like the practice contractions she'd had for weeks, the ones the doctor called Braxton Hicks, dull and manageable. This one started low in her back and moved forward like something tightening around her entire midsection, squeezing the breath out of her with calm, mechanical efficiency. She stopped walking. She grabbed the iron fence of a stranger's yard and held on and breathed through it the way she had been taught, and told herself it was probably nothing, probably just stress, probably just her body reacting to the cold and the fear. When it passed, she kept walking. She had made it to the corner of Creston and Marble Street when the second one came. This one was worse. She leaned against the wall of a closed pharmacy and pressed her forehead to the cool brick, and made a sound she had never made before, low and involuntary, pulled from somewhere primal. A car slowed. She assumed it would keep going. Most cars slowed for a moment near something alarming and then kept going, because that is what cars do, what people inside warm, dry cars do when the night is wet and strange and someone else's problem is visible on the sidewalk. But this car stopped. It was a dark car, large and quiet in the way that expensive things are quiet, and when the window came down, the man inside looked at her with an expression she had not expected. Not pity, not suspicion, something more careful than either of those. "Are you in labor?" he asked. His voice was even, not panicked, not performatively concerned, just a direct question, asked with the calm of someone who needed accurate information before deciding what to do next. Amara straightened. Another contraction was building at the edges, and she had maybe 30 seconds before it arrived. "I don't know," she said honestly. "How far apart are the contractions?" She stared at him. "How did you know they were contractions?" "Because you're 9 months pregnant. It's midnight. You're standing alone in the rain holding a fence, and you just made a sound that I've only heard once before in my life, and it was in a delivery room." He said it without drama. "How far apart?" That was the second one, maybe 10 minutes from the first. He was already reaching across to open the passenger door. "Get in, I'll take you to Mercy General." She did not move. The rain was coming harder now and the contraction was arriving, and she held the fence again and breathed through it while he waited, engine running, door open. When it passed, she looked at him properly for the first time. He was somewhere in his mid-30s. Dark suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open at the throat. His face was angular and composed, the kind of face that had learned to give very little away. But his eyes, dark and steady under the orange wash of the streetlight, were watching her with an attention that felt genuine. There was no impatience in them. He was simply waiting. "I don't know you," Amara said. "No," he agreed. "My name is Declan Okafor. I'm a person in a car on a rainy night, and you are a person about to have a baby on a sidewalk. Those are the only relevant facts right now." She picked up her duffel bag. She got in the car. Declan Okafor was 36 years old, and he had spent the past decade building a logistics and infrastructure company from a single leased warehouse into an enterprise that moved goods across 4 continents. He was the kind of man whose name appeared in financial columns and whose face appeared at industry conferences, and who had, in the years since his company went public, accumulated the particular loneliness that comes with a life built entirely around achievement. He had been driving home from a late meeting when he had seen her. He had almost not stopped. There was a version of that night where Declan Okafor's driver instinct overrode his human one, and he kept driving, and he would think about that version sometimes in the months that followed, with a kind of quiet horror. But he had stopped. He drove to Mercy General without speaking much, only asking once whether she needed him to drive faster, and once whether the pain was manageable. Amara answered both questions truthfully, no and barely. At the hospital entrance, he pulled up to the emergency bay and got out and held the door open for her, and carried her duffel bag to the desk, and told the admissions nurse in a tone that left no room for delay that this woman needed to be seen immediately. They took her back within 4 minutes. In the chaos of being wheeled down a corridor and hooked to monitors, and surrounded by the efficient bustle of medical professionals who had seen this particular emergency 1,000 times, Amara turned her head and looked back toward the waiting area. She expected Declan Okafor to be gone. People dropped strangers at emergency rooms and left. That was the normal thing. That was the expected thing. He was sitting in one of the plastic waiting room chairs with her duffel bag at his feet, still in his wet suit, checking his phone. She didn't have time to think about what that meant. The contractions were coming faster now. Amara Nana Osai had grown up in the kind of household where appearances were maintained with the discipline of a military operation. Her father, Bernard Osai, was a retired civil engineer who had built his reputation on precision and control, and he had applied both qualities to the raising of his children with the same exacting standards he had once applied to load-bearing structures. He believed in family name above almost everything. He believed in order. He believed that certain kinds of trouble reflected not just on the person who had made the mistake, but on the entire architecture of the family, and that such trouble could not be accommodated. When Amara had come home 4 months ago with the news that she was pregnant and that the father of the child, A man named Tobias, whom she had loved with the wholehearted recklessness of someone who had never been allowed to be reckless before, had left the country without a word and blocked her on every platform. Her father had listened in silence. He had asked 2 questions. The first was whether she was certain the pregnancy was too far along to terminate. She had told him she would not do that regardless. The second was whether Tobias could be found and made to marry her. She had said she didn't want that either. Bernard Osai had nodded once. He had told her she had until the baby was born to make other arrangements. The birthday dinner had been a mistake. Amara had thought that perhaps, with the birth so close, with the reality of a grandchild so imminent and specific, something in her father might soften. She had been wrong. An aunt had made a comment at the dinner table, something offhand and cruel about the family's standing in their church community, and Bernard Osai had looked at his daughter across the table with an expression that contained no ambiguity at all, and before the dessert plates were cleared, he had said, quietly and finally, that she needed to take her things and go. Her mother had not intervened. Kofi had carried the bag. The door had made that soft, definitive click. In the delivery room at Mercy General, with no family beside her and a stranger's duffel bag serving as the only object connecting her to the life she had lived 3 hours ago, Amara Osai pushed her daughter into the world at 3:47 in the morning. The baby was small and furious and perfect. She screamed with the full-throated confidence of someone who had strong opinions about being alive, and the nurse laughed and said she was going to be trouble in the best possible way, and Amara held her against her chest and felt something shift inside her so profoundly that she understood, for the first time, that her entire previous life had been a preparation for this exact moment, and nothing more. She named her Nadia. What would you have named her? And if you've ever witnessed a moment that changed everything, a birth, a loss, a stranger's unexpected kindness, tell us about it in the comments. We read every single one. When the nurse asked whether there was anyone to be called, Amara thought of her phone with its 11% battery and the contacts saved in it and realized there was no one. Not in the way the nurse meant, not someone who would come. "There's a man in the waiting room," she said, and was startled to realize she was saying it. "His name is Declan Okafor. Could you just tell him that we're okay?" The nurse came back 10 minutes later. "He says he'll wait until morning to make sure you have a safe way home." Amara looked at the ceiling of the delivery room. She looked at her daughter, who had stopped screaming and was now examining the world with the focused intensity of someone cataloging information. She felt a complicated thing move through her, something that was gratitude and something that was more than gratitude, and something she was too exhausted and too raw to name. She slept. In the morning, a social worker came. Her name was Patience, and she was brisk and kind in equal measure, the way people become when they have spent years in a job that demands both. She asked about housing, about family support, about financial resources. Amara answered honestly. Patience wrote things down and made calls and came back with information about a transitional housing program that had a bed available for mothers with newborns across the city in a neighborhood Amara didn't know. It was something, it was not nothing. When Amara was discharged in the early afternoon, Declan Okafor was in the waiting room. He had changed clothes, he must have gone home and come back, and he was holding 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag from the bakery down the street. He stood when he saw her come through the doors with Nadia in a hospital-issued blanket, and his expression did something complicated and brief before it settled back into its usual composure. "You came back," Amara said. "You had my number to call if you needed a ride and 11% battery when you got in my car." He held out the coffee. "I didn't want to leave things to chance." She took the coffee. She looked at him over the rim of the cup, this man who had stopped his car in the rain, who had sat in a plastic chair in a wet suit until nearly 4 in the morning, who had gone home and changed, and returned with breakfast for a woman he did not know. She tried to find the angle, the motive beneath the kindness. She had been raised in a house where kindness from strangers always had a visible underside. She couldn't find one. "I have somewhere to go," she told him. "A transitional housing program. I have the address." "I'll drive you." You don't have to. I know. She let him drive her. The transitional housing facility was a converted Victorian house on Aldersham Street that smelled of industrial cleaner and something warmer underneath, something like soup and baby powder. The woman who ran it was named Ms. Fortunata, a broad Jamaican woman in her 60s who took one look at Amara and Nadia and said, come inside, you look like you haven't slept in a year," and ushered them through the door with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for decades and intended to keep doing it. Declan carried the duffel bag to the room. It was small, with a single bed and a crib that had been set up by the window and a radiator that knocked and hissed but produced genuine warmth. He set the bag down and looked around the room and looked at Amara and Nadia, and something passed across his face again, that complicated and brief thing she couldn't quite read. "Is there anything you need?" he asked, immediately, today. "You've done enough," Amara said. "That wasn't what I asked." She looked at her daughter in her arms. She looked at the single duffel bag. She thought of everything she had left behind in the room at her parents' house. The baby clothes she had folded and stacked in careful piles, the small stuffed elephant she had bought at a street market, the journal she had been keeping since she found out she was pregnant, recording everything she wanted to remember to tell Nadia someday. All of it still behind that iron gate. "There are things at my parents' house," she said quietly. "Baby things. I don't know if they'll let me get them." "Give me the address," Declan said. She shook her head. "You can't just go to someone's house and ask for." "Give me the address, Amara." She gave him the address. He was gone for 2 hours. When he came back, his car contained every item from Amara's room at the Osai compound. The baby clothes in their careful stacks, the stuffed elephant, the journal, Amara's books, her drawing supplies, the small framed photograph of her grandmother, her winter coat, her good shoes, things she had not even mentioned, things he had simply understood a person would need. She stood in the doorway of the small room on Aldersham Street and looked at the back seat of his car and felt something crack open in her chest. "How did they let you in?" she managed. "Your mother opened the gate," he said simply. "She helped me pack." Amara pressed her lips together. She didn't trust herself to speak. She took Nadia from the crook of her arm and pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead and breathed, until she was sure she could do it without falling apart. Her mother had helped him pack. Her mother, who had stood behind her father with her hands flat against her thighs. Her mother, who had not intervened. It was not forgiveness. It was not a phone call or an apology or a gate that opened for her own daughter. But it was something, a small, imperfect something. Declan made no comment about what he had found at the house or what had been said. He simply unloaded the car and carried things up to the room, and when everything was inside and arranged as well as the small space would allow, he stood at the door and said he would check in. "You don't know me," Amara said again. It was becoming her refrain. "No," he agreed again, "but I'd like to." He left his card on the windowsill beside the crib. He left. Amara sat on the edge of the bed with Nadia in her lap and the stuffed elephant in her hand, and the card on the windowsill catching the afternoon light, and she thought about the strange geometry of the past 24 hours, about a gate clicking shut and a car window coming down, about the way the worst night of her life had somehow also contained the most unexpected kindness she had ever received from another human being. She picked up the card, Declan Okafor, founder and CEO, Okafor Meridian Group, a phone number, an email address, nothing else. She put the card back on the windowsill. She was not ready for whatever this was. She was one day postpartum and newly homeless, and in the early stages of grief for a family that had chosen its reputation over its daughter. She was going to need every molecule of herself just to get through the next week, the next month. But she put the card back on the windowsill, and she did not throw it away. Weeks passed, then a month, then 2. Life in the transitional house on Aldersham Street had its own rhythm. Amara fell into it the way you fall into cold water, breathlessly at first, then adjusting, then learning to move in it. She was up multiple times each night with Nadia, who was a vocal and opinionated baby with no interest in sleeping for more than 2 hours at a stretch. She attended the parenting workshops the facility offered. She started talking to the other women in the house, quietly at first and then with increasing openness, the way people bond when they are all in the same particular kind of difficult. Ms. Fortunata proved to be the kind of woman who feeds you soup when you haven't eaten, who notices when you've been crying and says nothing, but sets a cup of tea beside your elbow, who tells you the hard truth with such fundamental warmth that it lands like a gift rather than a blow. She told Amara 6 weeks in that she had a good mind and that she was wasting it sitting in this room feeling guilty for things that were not her fault. "What were you doing before?" Ms. Fortunata asked, "before all this?" "I had 1 semester left of my design degree," Amara said. "Graphic design." Ms. Fortunata looked at her steadily. "So finish it." "I have a newborn and no money and no." "I know what you have and what you don't have. I asked what you were doing before. Finish it." Declan had texted twice in the first 2 months, both times brief, both times checking in. How is she settling? How is the baby? Both times Amara had answered in a few careful sentences. She was not ready for more. She sensed that he understood this, that the brevity of his messages was a deliberate courtesy, a door left open rather than a request to walk through it. On a Tuesday evening in Nadia's 3rd month, Amara's phone rang with his name on the screen, and she looked at it for 2 full rings before she answered. "There's something I want to ask you," Declan said without preamble, "and I want you to say no if you want to say no. I mean that." She tucked the phone against her shoulder. Nadia was asleep in the crib, making the small rhythmic sounds that Amara had come to understand as deeply comfortable sleep. "Ask." "My company has a position, junior design consultant on our communications team. It's entry-level, remote-capable 3 days a week, and it has full benefits including childcare support." A pause. "Before you say anything, I'm not offering it to you because of what happened. I'm offering it because I looked up your portfolio online after that first week, and you're talented, and the position is real and it's open and you would be good at it." The silence stretched. "You looked up my portfolio," Amara said. "You have a public website. It wasn't difficult." Declan: "Yes. Did you create this position?" A shorter pause this time. "The position existed. I may have accelerated the hiring timeline." Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the complicated grief and the wariness she wore like a second skin, Amara laughed. It surprised her, the laugh. It came out of her before she could stop it, genuine and unguarded, and Nadia stirred in the crib and made a small sound of mild complaint. "Send me the job description," Amara said, "the real one, and I'll apply through the proper channels like a normal person." "Of course," he said, and she could hear something in his voice, something that sounded like relief. "Here's a question worth sitting with. Is it harder to accept help from a stranger than from someone who loves you? Why do you think that is? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your perspective." She applied. She interviewed with the head of communications, a sharp and skeptical woman named Theodora who asked pointed questions about her portfolio and her design philosophy, and gave no indication whatsoever that Amara was anything other than a regular candidate. She got the job on her own merit, and she knew it, and it mattered enormously that she knew it. She started work 6 weeks later, when Nadia was 4.5 months old and sleeping 5-hour stretches, and had begun to regard the world with the sociable curiosity of someone who finds everything interesting. Ms. Fortunata watched Nadia on the remote days with a devotion that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this grandmotherly occupation all along. Amara was good at the work. She had always been good at design, at the logic of visual communication, at understanding what a color or a shape or a negative space was saying underneath the surface. At Okafor Meridian, she found a team that took her seriously and work that engaged her completely, and for the first time since the night on Creston Avenue, she felt something that was adjacent to her old self, or perhaps a better version of her old self, tempered and clarified by everything that had happened. She and Declan moved in careful increments. He was not the kind of man who made grand gestures or declarations. He was precise and thoughtful, and he paid attention with an intensity that was sometimes unsettling in how complete it was. He noticed that she took her coffee without sugar and remembered it. He noticed that she went quiet when certain topics came up: her family, Tobias, the night on Creston Avenue, and he did not press. He learned the shape of her silences. She learned that he had built his company in the aftermath of his own particular kind of devastation. A business partner who had defrauded him early on, taking nearly everything, and the years of grinding reconstruction that had followed. She learned that beneath the composed exterior was a person who had spent a decade making himself impenetrable, and was only now, cautiously and with great uncertainty, wondering whether that was still necessary. They had dinner for the first time as something other than professional acquaintances, on a Thursday evening in April, at a small Ethiopian restaurant Amara had suggested, and they talked for 3 hours, and when the restaurant began to close around them, they moved the conversation to the sidewalk and talked for another hour in the mild spring dark, and when Declan finally said he should let her get home to Nadia. There was a moment at the corner of the street where they stood facing each other, and the city moved around them, and neither of them said anything for a few seconds. "This was good," Amara said. "Yes," Declan said. He said it the way he said most things, directly, without hedging, as if the word had been weighed before it was offered. But there were complications, of course there were. 3 months after Amara started at Okafor Meridian, a profile of Declan ran in a business magazine. Standard executive profile, the kind that ran every month in a dozen publications. It mentioned in 2 sentences near the end that Declan had been seen at an industry event with a new companion, described as a young designer at his company. The 2 sentences were neutral and factual. The comments section beneath the article was not. The comments said that she was using him, that she had manufactured the circumstances of their meeting, that a single mother with nothing to her name had latched onto a billionaire with calculated precision. One comment, which got a troubling number of upvotes, said that any man who let his judgment be clouded by a pretty face and a baby deserved to lose his company. Declan's assistant forwarded him the article as a matter of routine. He read the comments. He did not mention them to Amara. Someone else did. A woman named Petra, who had been with Okafor Meridian for 7 years, and considered herself something of an institutional guardian of Declan's interests. Stopped by Amara's desk one afternoon with the particular energy of someone who has decided that something must be said. She sat down without being invited and folded her hands on Amara's desk, and said, in a low and completely sincere voice, that she hoped Amara understood the sensitivity of her position, that Declan was a very private man who had been hurt before, and that it would reflect very poorly on everyone if it turned out that the circumstances of their meeting were not as straightforwardly innocent as they appeared. Amara looked at her for a long moment. "Are you asking me whether I staged being 9 months pregnant in a rainstorm at midnight?" she said. Petra had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "I'm asking you to be aware that people are watching." "People are always watching," Amara said. "I'm going to go back to my work now." Petra left. Amara stared at her screen for 5 minutes without doing anything. Then she called Declan. She told him about Petra's visit. She told him about the article. She told him, and she was surprised by how clearly she could articulate it, that she was not going to spend the next chapter of her life defending the legitimacy of her own hardship to people who had decided the story in advance. There was a long pause on his end. "I'll speak to Petra," he said. "That's not what I'm calling about." "Then what are you calling about?" She hesitated. This was the part she had been circling for weeks, the question she had been afraid to arrive at directly. "I need to know," she said, "that you see me, not the night on Creston Avenue, not the duffel bag and the rain and the drama of it, me, because I can't build anything on a story, Declan. I need it to be real." The pause this time was different, softer. "I've been seeing you since you stood in the rain and told me you didn't know me and then got in my car anyway," he said. That took courage, the kind of courage I've been working on having for years. Another pause. I see you, Amara. She closed her eyes. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. But the world had its own opinions about their story, and it was not done sharing them. The article led to a cascade of attention that neither of them had anticipated. Someone identified Amara from the profile description and found her social media presence, which was minimal and personal, and had never been intended for a public audience. Someone else found the public records from the transitional housing facility on Aldersham Street. The narrative that assembled itself online bore only the vaguest resemblance to what had actually happened. It was missing all the rain and the terror and the contractions and the plastic waiting room chairs and the duffel bag of baby clothes retrieved from a closed gate. It contained instead a tidy and reductive arc. Broke single mother catches billionaire. Amara's phone began to ring with numbers she didn't recognize. Journalists mostly, but also, on a Tuesday morning that she would not quickly forget, her brother Kofi. She almost didn't answer. She sat watching his name on the screen for so long that it nearly went to voicemail. Then she picked up. I saw the article, Kofi said. He sounded the way he had when he was very young and had done something wrong and was working up to acknowledging it. The first one and the ones after. Okay, Amara said. I've been trying to figure out how to call for months. His voice was careful, fragile in a way she had never associated with Kofi, who had always been the most buttoned up of the Osai children, the one most like their father. I carried your bag down the steps, Amara. I carried it and I put it on the ground and I didn't look at your face and I went inside. She said nothing. I want to meet Nadia, he said. If you'll let me, I want to meet her and I want to tell you that I'm sorry and I know that might not be enough and I understand if it isn't. Outside the window of her new apartment, she had moved from Aldersham Street 2 months ago, into a place of her own, a small bright second-floor apartment with a window that caught the afternoon sun. Nadia was in her bouncer making the particular triumphant sound she made whenever she succeeded in grabbing her own foot, which was currently her greatest ambition in life. Come on Saturday, Amara said. She has a stuffed elephant she'll probably throw at you. Kofi laughed. It was a wet and unsteady laugh. I deserve that, he said. The reunion was imperfect. Important things usually are. Kofi sat on Amara's floor and held Nadia with the stiff uncertainty of a man who had not held many Barbies and was terrified of doing it wrong, and Nadia regarded him with the same focused cataloguing attention she applied to all new things. Kofi told Amara that their mother asked about the baby, that she had not been able to come herself, not yet, not with their father still intractable in his position, but that she asked. It was not enough, it was more than nothing. Amara held both of those things at once and decided that holding them both was probably what healing looked like, not a door that opened fully and at once, but a gate slowly, a bolt drawn back one notch at a time. Declan met Nadia for the first time on a Sunday in June when the air had turned warm, and the city smelled like cut grass and takeout, and the particular optimism of early summer. He sat on Amara's living room floor without any apparent concern for his very expensive trousers, and held out one finger for Nadia to examine, and Nadia, who had strong opinions about people and communicated them immediately, grabbed his finger and attempted to eat it. She's extraordinary, he said. She attempted to eat your finger, Amara said from the kitchen. Yes, I'm taking it as a sign of trust. Amara leaned in the kitchen doorway and watched him with her daughter, this precise, controlled man sitting cross-legged on her floor while a 7-month-old tried to gum his index finger and felt something settle in her. Something that had been in motion since the night on Creston Avenue, tumbling and uncertain, landed quietly in its right place. She had spent 7 months being afraid that what she felt for Declan Okafor was gratitude wearing love's clothes, that she would not be able to separate the two, that the debt of that first night would tangle itself into every feeling that followed until she couldn't see clearly. She had tested it the way she tested everything, methodically, rigorously, with great willingness to find the answer she feared. What she found instead was this: a man who argued with her about design theory with genuine conviction, and was sometimes wrong and could admit it. A man who was afraid of intimacy in ways he was only beginning to articulate and was doing the uncomfortable work of articulating them anyway. A man who had come back to a hospital waiting room in a wet suit because he didn't want to leave things to chance. A man who sat on floors and let Barbies eat his fingers. The gratitude was real and it was separate. It had its own room. The rest of what she felt was not gratitude. It was something that had grown in the months of careful conversation and shared dinners and long calls after Nadia was asleep, something that belonged to who they actually were with each other, not to what he had done on one rainy night. It was love, she was almost certain. She was willing to bet her carefully reconstructed life on it. She brought him coffee and sat next to him on the floor, and Nadia looked at both of them and made a sound of supreme contentment. Here is what Amara had not expected, that the hardest conversation would not be with her father or with the internet or even with herself. It would be with Declan, on a quiet October evening, 7 months into something that had no name yet because she had been afraid to name it. He had been distracted for 2 weeks, present but somewhere else, his eyes landing slightly past things, his responses a half-beat slower. She had noticed and said nothing, giving him space, the way she had learned he needed space to arrive at things in his own time. Then he arrived. "I need to tell you something about why I drive myself home late at night," he said. They were sitting on her balcony with the last of the warm weather, the city below them amber and lit, instead of having a driver. She waited. "My wife," he said, and then he stopped. He looked at the city. He started again. "I had a wife, Soren. We were very young. She died in a car accident 8 years ago. The driver had been with us for 3 years and he fell asleep at the wheel and I was supposed to be in that car." He said it flatly, precisely, the way people say things they have made themselves able to say through repeated practice. "I was late. A meeting ran over and I told Soren to go ahead and I'd meet her at the restaurant." He stopped again. "I've driven myself since then. It's not rational. I know it isn't rational." The silence between them was the particular quality of silence that follows something important. "I'm not trying to make you responsible for this," he said. You said you needed me to be real with you. This is real." Amara reached over and put her hand over his. She didn't say anything for a while. The city breathed below them. "Thank you," she said finally, "for trusting me with it." He turned his hand over and held hers. "I think," he said slowly, like a man testing whether the words were true as he said them, "that I've been building things because it felt safer than loving things. Buildings don't leave. Companies don't. They don't get in cars and not come home." A long pause. "You and Nadia are the first things in 8 years that have made me feel like the risk is worth it. Think about the bravest thing someone has ever said to you, not a heroic act, but a moment of real emotional courage. Does this scene remind you of it? We'd love to hear your story in the comments." "Declan," she said. "Yes. I love you." He looked at her, the city lights caught in his eyes, that complicated and brief expression she had been learning to read since a rainy midnight moved across his face, and this time she read it clearly. It was not composure. It was a man working very hard not to be overwhelmed. "I love you," he said. "I've loved you since you stood in the rain and told me you didn't know me, like it was a warning you were giving yourself." She laughed and it came out slightly wet, and she didn't care. They sat on the balcony until the city went quiet. The complication that came next was not Declan's past, or the internet, or Petra, or any of the things Amara had been watchful for. It was Tobias. He reappeared in December, 18 months after he had vanished. He had been in London, it emerged, where he had apparently been doing well. He had seen the articles. He had, a mutual acquaintance told Amara, with the particular relish people bring to delivering dramatic information, hired a lawyer. The lawyer sent a letter to Amara's address. It contained language about paternity rights, about access, about his client's desire to be a present father. It was written with the careful neutrality of legal language, which did nothing to soften the blow of it landing. Amara sat with the letter for 1 full day before she called anyone. She sat with it the way she sat with difficult things, head on, giving it its full weight, not looking away. She felt rage, bright and clarifying. She felt fear, because legal proceedings cost money and time, and the outcome of such things was never guaranteed. She felt underneath both of these, the mother animal certainty that she would burn everything down before she let Nadia be claimed by a person who had blocked them both before Nadia was even born. She called her lawyer, she had a lawyer now, a gift from a life that had stabilized, and she called Declan, and she made herself move forward rather than freeze. What followed was 3 months of legal process that Amara would later describe as the most exhausting experience of her adult life, including the night on Creston Avenue. Tobias's lawyer was skilled, and Tobias himself had clearly prepared a version of events that cast his disappearance as a mutual decision and his reappearance as responsibility rather than opportunism. Declan offered resources. Amara accepted what she needed and declined the rest, drawing the line at a certain point, insisting on maintaining the portions of this fight she needed to fight herself. He respected the line. He showed up in the ways she allowed, to watch Nadia on long preparation days, to be present and steady in the evenings when the stress accumulated, to argue through strategies with her at the kitchen table with the systematic intelligence he brought to everything. On the day of the final hearing, Amara wore the blue coat she had bought with her first proper paycheck from Okafor Meridian. She had her lawyer beside her and her evidence organized and her testimony prepared, and she walked into that courtroom with the posture of a woman who has survived the worst night of her life and everything that came after it, and has not been diminished by any of it. The judge was a precise woman in her 50s who asked clear questions and listened to the answers with the same focused attention Amara had come to associate with people who took their work seriously. Tobias's account of mutual agreement fell apart under cross-examination with the quiet efficiency of something that had not been built to withstand scrutiny. The blocking of Amara's accounts, the absence during the pregnancy, the missed birth, all of it was there in the record, time-stamped and documented. The court awarded Amara full primary custody. Tobias was granted supervised visitation, subject to review. It was not the permanent erasure that Amara's rage had wanted, but it was protection, it was structure, it was the law standing between Nadia and an uncertainty she hadn't asked for. Outside the courthouse, Amara stood in the winter air and felt the last tightly held thing inside her loosen. Declan was there. He had been in the corridor at her request, not in the courtroom itself. She had needed to do the courtroom alone, but there when she came through the doors. He was holding a terrible cup of vending machine coffee because the good cafe across the street had a 20-minute line and he had wanted to be back before she came out. She took the terrible coffee, she drank it, she looked at him. "Nadia and I are okay," she said. "I know," he said, "I never doubted it." Spring came. It came the way it does in cities, suddenly and with great confidence, the trees along Aldersham Street. She still drove past Miss Fortunata's house sometimes, out of a loyalty that had become affection, erupting in pale green that made everything look tentative and hopeful. Nadia was 14 months old and walking, or rather performing a determined and high-speed version of walking that was functionally indistinguishable from running, and she had 4 words she deployed with great authority. Mama, no, eat, and a version of Declan's name that came out as Decker and made him look, every time, like a man who had been handed something he had not expected to be given and did not know how to hold but was learning. He was learning. On a Saturday in April, Amara's mother came. She came alone, without Bernard Osai, without announcement, on a morning when Nadia was in the garden of the apartment building pulling up fistfuls of dirt, with the focused joy of a person engaged in meaningful work. Amara heard the buzzer and looked at the intercom screen and stood very still for a moment. She buzzed her in. Her mother, Adwoa Osai, a small and careful woman who had spent 40 years making herself smaller and more careful in the vicinity of Bernard Osai's certainties, came through the door and saw her granddaughter in the garden and stopped walking. Nadia looked up from her dirt with the same focused cataloguing attention she had given Declan's finger, and then she held up a fistful of dirt in offering. Adwoa Osai made a sound that was not a word. She sat down on the garden step in her good coat, without apparent concern for her good coat, and held out her hands, and Nadia deposited the dirt into them with great ceremony, and Edwoa looked at this small determined person who had her daughter's eyes and her own mother's brow, and she said, softly and to herself, "Oh." Amara stood in the doorway and watched, and did not say anything. Later, when Nadia was napping and the tea was made, her mother sat at the kitchen table and said the things she had probably been rehearsing for a year, that she was sorry, that she had stood with her hands flat against her thighs because she was afraid of what would happen if she didn't, that she had helped Declan pack the boxes because it was the only thing she could do that night that felt like something, that she had asked Kofi about them every week since, that she had looked at Nadia's face in the photographs Kofi showed her and understood, with a clarity that her life had not often offered her, that she had made the wrong choice, and that wrong choices, if you are paying attention, announce themselves eventually and unmistakably. "Your father," she said and stopped. She held her teacup in both hands. "Your father is not ready. I don't know if he will be." "I know," Amara said. "But I am." Her mother looked at her. "I'm ready, if you'll have me." The thing about forgiveness is that it is not a single moment. It is a direction. It is a decision to move towards someone rather than away, knowing that the movement is not the same as forgetting. That the arrival will be complicated and ongoing, and will require maintenance in the way that all important things require maintenance. Amara understood this. She had been learning it for 18 months. "Come on Sunday," she said. "Bring something for lunch. Nadia is very interested in food right now." Her mother smiled. It was a smile that had been waiting a long time. "What does it take to forgive someone who hurt you when you needed them most? Not because they deserve it, but because you do. Tell us what you think in the comments. This is the question at the heart of everything." Declan proposed on a Wednesday, which was not a traditional day for proposals, but he was not a traditional man, and the moment arrived on a Wednesday, and he did not see the sense in waiting for a more conventionally romantic day. They were in the kitchen. Amara was trying to get Nadia to eat sweet potato, which Nadia was depositing over the side of her high chair with methodical determination. Declan was making coffee and watching the sweet potato situation with poorly concealed amusement. He put down the coffee. He turned around. He said, without elaborate preamble, that he had a question, and he asked it. "I have a 14-month-old who is currently throwing sweet potato on my floor," Amara said. "I know, I want all of it, the sweet potato and the floor and the two of you, specifically the two of you. The sweet potato is negotiable." She looked at him across the kitchen. She thought about the night on Creston Avenue and the rain and the car window coming down. She thought about plastic chairs and duffel bags and terrible vending machine coffee and cork corridors and garden steps and dirt deposited into good coats. She thought about how life assembles itself out of the most unlikely materials, how the worst night can contain the first thread of the best thing, how a gate clicking shut can be the sound of something else beginning. "Yes," she said. Nadia, as if aware that something important had been decided, stopped throwing sweet potato and looked at both of them with her focused, cataloguing attention. Then she held out a piece of sweet potato in offering. Declan took it. He accepted this. On a morning in early June, 14 months after she had stood on Creston Avenue with a duffel bag and nowhere to go, Amara Osei stood in the garden of Ms. Fortunata's house on Aldersham Street. She was not 9 months pregnant. She was not soaked with rain. She was wearing a dress the color of deep water, and she had flowers in her hair, and Nadia was in her arms, formally attired in a white dress and extremely unhappy about shoes, making her views on shoes known to anyone within a 20-foot radius. The ceremony was small. Ms. Fortunata was there, magnificent in orange. Kofi was there, holding a handkerchief he had not yet needed but was clearly prepared to need. Theodora from the communications team was there. Patience, the social worker, was there, off duty and genuinely happy. Declan's 2 oldest friends were there, large quiet men who looked at him with the particular softness that people reserve for someone they have worried about for a long time and are glad to stop worrying about. Edwoa Osei was there, in a seat in the front row, in her good coat. She had brought something for lunch. Bernard Osai was not there. It was a wound. Amara had stopped expecting it to stop being one. She had learned to hold it alongside the other things, the garden and the flowers and the man beside her and the daughter in her arms and the morning in June, and to let it occupy its own space without allowing it to colonize everything else. When Declan took her hand, he took it the way he did everything, with full attention, with the deliberate care of someone who knows the value of what they're holding. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in that first moment through the rain-wet window of his car, that steady and complete attention, and she understood now what it had felt like from the inside, like recognition, like something he had been looking for without knowing he was looking. She married him. They said the things people say in those moments, the things that are small and enormous at the same time, the things that are obvious and impossible and necessary. Nadia contributed a decisive no at approximately the right moment, which produced laughter that broke the ceremony open into something warm and real and nothing like solemnity, and it was better for it. Afterward, standing in the garden with the city doing its city things over the walls and Miss Fortunata's soup heating in the kitchen and Nadia asleep at last against Declan's chest, with her small hand fisted in his collar, Amara thought about gates. About the ones that close and the ones that open, about how you cannot always tell in the moment of closing which kind it is, about how the night she had stood on Creston Avenue, watching the intercom light go dark, she had believed with her whole body that she was experiencing an ending, the end of belonging somewhere, the end of being someone's daughter in the way that mattered. She had been wrong, or rather she had been right about the ending and wrong about what endings mean. Endings are not conclusions, they are clearings. They are the gate clicking shut behind you and the first uncertain step forward into a night that turns out to contain, somewhere in the rain-soaked dark, a car window coming down and a voice asking the right question. She looked at her husband, she looked at her daughter, she looked at the garden, which smelled of early summer and her mother's perfume and something cooking in Miss Fortunata's kitchen. She was home, not a place she had returned to. A place she had built, brick by brick, from the rubble of a midnight in the rain. She was home. If Amara's story moved you, if any part of it reminded you of your own journey, your own midnight on your own version of Creston Avenue, leave a comment and tell us. Not because we want the drama of it, but because the most important thing about hard stories is that they remind us we aren't the only ones who have lived through them. You are not the only one. And if you're in the middle of yours right now, still walking in the rain with a duffel bag, please hear this, keep walking. The car window comes down, it does. And if you've been watching this channel and this story gave you something, a feeling, a thought, a memory, please subscribe and share it with one person who needs to hear that hard nights don't last forever. That's all, one person. That's how stories do their work.